one of the things I kept telling all the speakers is stay in the box so that the view is here, which is counter to what I want to do personally, which is why it's hard to do. Anyway, hi, I'm Michael Laine. I'm the president of Liftport Group. We're going to talk about some interesting stuff, and this should be a bit of a conversation. This is not a me to you lecture. This is something that's very much a work in progress, and I'll describe how that is in a minute. My background is I was a part of the original NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research team on the space elevator. So I've been doing big idea stuff for about 20 years now. 2001, 2, and 3 under the NASA umbrella. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 under my company Liftport. When the economy crashed, we got crushed, so we went out of business. And so a lot of the stuff you've heard about space elevators, there is some new stuff. So definitely check out Pete Swan's stuff over in the other room. I'm not involved with Earth elevator work anymore. Over those 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we did a lot in carbon nanotubes, material sciences, super strings. We did a lot in robotics. That was really where our company really kind of shone. It really shined. We climbed as high as 1 mile on balloons tethered to the ground. We lasted as long as 60 days. So high altitude, long endurance. And we were trying to push those two things together when everything fell apart for us. And so we stopped being able to do that. So a lot of quiet time between 2007 and 2010. I did a lot of other things related to space. But in 2017, we restarted the company to focus on going to the moon, a lunar elevator, which I considered submitting for this talk today. Decided it wasn't really the right audience, but that's our primary focus, is the lunar elevator. And we're working on that pretty diligently, and we have been for the last several years. The first version of our company was 14 people. Our current version is only 5, and hats off to my 5 because we couldn't do this stuff without them. But we're a much smaller company. It's a different kind of company. And so over the last several years, I've kind of watched this evolution of the Earth elevator. So just show of hands, how many people know what I'm talking about, Earth elevator? All right, most of this room, great. The science fiction version of it is a ball and a string, spinning it overhead. The string in the middle stays straight. If you make a long enough, strong enough string and attach it to the Earth as the Earth is rotating, you can climb mechanically out into space. That's an idea that's over 100 years old. The lunar system is a little bit different. The mechanics are different, but the concepts are basically the same. You take a rocket out to the Lagrange point between the Earth and the moon, drop a string down to the surface, pull that string back towards the Earth, not touching, of course, but towards the Earth. Then Earth's gravity keeps the string straight. You once again have a mechanical process to get back and forth to the lunar surface. We start doing all that work, and that's relevant to this, that we start doing all that work before there was an active program to go to the moon. Our first initial plan was soft landing on the moon is shockingly hard. No offense to my friends in Israel and India, but they've just spent $500 million making craters on the moon, right? Landing on the moon is difficult. And so the original plan was to make the process a little simpler. Over time, over the last 10 years, there's all this push to go back to the moon. Nations are working on it, companies are working on it. And it changed the dynamics of our plan. And as we pivoted first away from the Earth elevator to the lunar, from the Earth elevator to the lunar elevator, what we realize is, yes, we still have that down mass capability on the moon, but something that's really interesting there is the Lagrange point, EML1, Earth Moon Lagrange 1, is very, very, very valuable if it's stabilized by a string on the moon. If it's not stabilized, if there's nothing to hold you in place, it's an unstable position, it's going to fall. But if it's stabilized by a string, and that suddenly kind of like a couple light bulbs went off, and we realized, things are about to change a lot in space. And because I've been a futurist for a long time, I kind of have a pretty good crystal ball on how things might be moving. We realized that a space station at L1 can be built massively, cities in the sky kind of thing. And that's something nobody was really thinking about before. We made some presentations to the chief scientist of US Space Force, Dr. Joel Mosier. We literally showed him things he had never seen before. In 30 years of government service, we showed him stuff he had never seen, never considered before. And it kind of started this cycle of, well, if that's something he hasn't considered, what other things are out there that people are not considering? So during the course of the events that I told you we've been doing over the last 2 years, I was having a one-on-one conversation with my friend, Michael Mealing. Mealing is a venture capitalist. He runs Starbridge Ventures. And we are on video, but we were just riffing, just having a conversation about what the next kind of frontier looks like for investment and the kinds of investments he is looking for, the things that are getting his attention. And he's like, nobody's really talking about Starship. And I was like, wow, you're right. Nobody is. This was in early 2020. It was early 2020. He's like, nobody is talking about Starship. Nobody is putting business plans in front of us. Nobody's trying to raise capital. Did I just lose power? Partly. Yes, but I need the other mic. Thank you. No, I'm set. Thank you. I'm good. Thank you. Loud and clear? Okay. I changed these batteries personally this morning. Good times. I have really enjoyed this kind of, I'm calling it a side hustle for James. I've really enjoyed it. I don't want to sound like I'm negative about it, but I'm super glad it's not my day job. We're talking about nobody's thinking about, planning about, financing about, investing about this new idea of Starship. So what are we talking about? I'm going to guess that everybody in this building knows what Starship is, right? Thumbs up. Okay. All right. It is a giant spacecraft, maybe launch for the first orbital time next month. Fingers crossed. We're all wondering what that's going to look like. It's a development program, right? So Musk has crashed all the parts that led to this, and that's good. Nobody's complaining about that. That's part of that's his design mechanism. And I want to say personally, because there's 12,000 people at SpaceX, so it's not just about the guy, although that seems to be what the internet looks at. But he posted this, what's the date? January 2020. So think about when this is. The pandemic hasn't actually started yet. We're all thinking life is going to be normal for a while. And he's like, 3 flights a day. We're going to break this down in pieces here. 3 flights a day, all year, 1,095 flights a year, at 100 tons of capacity per flight. Let that sink in for a second. That's 300,000 metric tons a day, 660,000 tons in, imperial American system. The International Space Station took about 15 years to build, and it's about 900,000 tons. With this capacity, you could build it in a weekend. You could build the International Space Station in a weekend, have all the parts assembled on the ground, check the technology checked, because we know the technology is fickle, right? That's what this weekend has been teaching me. We know the technology is fickle, but you can test every component down here on the ground, put it in one great big box or 2 or 3 great big boxes, and launch it into the sky. You could launch the ISS equivalent in a weekend. That's how big this system is. Now, when he posted this, the internet kind of laughed, right? But I'm going to tell you a private, and that's now going to be public story. I've met Musk a couple times. We don't run in the same economic tax bracket, but we do run in the same circles. In the last 20 years, I've met him at a couple events. My very first event was the Mars Society back in 2002 in Denver, and this, like all of us, geeky, nerdy guy comes wandering around. It's like, hi, I'm doing this thing. I'm like, cool. We're all trying to go to Mars. So what? I had no idea who he was, what he was trying to do at that time. Pretty interesting conversation, but not memorable, not significant, just chatting like we do at these things, right? This is one great big strange family in this building, in this room, in this online community. And so he was just another guy, didn't have much of an impact that time. Second time, we're sharing a stage. That's an interesting experience, to share a stage with Elon Musk. That's not the Musk that we see in the papers right now, right? He's not the guy we see on the news right now. This is the version of him, gotta be 16, 17 years ago, not nearly as wealthy. Tesla didn't exist, none of that stuff was happening yet. And we're on a stage, and he's talking about his dreams for rockets, and I'm talking about my dreams for space elevators. And his direct quote, because he doesn't have a filter, in an audience, so he does not really concerned about, making people feel bad or embarrassing, or he's not good at social situations, in my experience. And he's like, you can't even build a footbridge out of carbon nanotubes. Don't talk to me about elevators to space. Now, that has stuck with me for a really long time, okay? And the truth is, he's right. So I'm going to go back in time for a minute and say, when I started this, when Dr. Edwards and I started this project way back in 2001, there were 400 satellites in the sky, just 400. This week, Starlink launched their 3,500th, and that's just one company's system. There's 10,000, there's 8,000 or so active satellites, and one company owns half of them, right? So the idea of building this elevator versus, what are you pointing at? 5 minutes, okay. The idea was, reusable rocketry was even more science fiction than space elevators, right? I mean, just put that in perspective. 20 years ago, there were space elevators seemed more technically feasible. And so with my last couple of minutes here, I want to kind of like bring this back to, I'm writing a paper and it's on a different screen and I'm not going to bring it up. I've got a paper and I've got about 15 or so invited co-authors that we're all thinking about what happens next. What happens if you can launch this capacity is the equivalent of a herd of elephants every day. Like we can launch really bizarre and unusual things to space if we want to now, if this comes to fruition. So that team at SpaceX has a 98.88 success rate for the Falcon. So you can look at that and say, okay, we don't have Starship yet, but under the expectation that we will, and under the history that they have already proven, a 98.88 success rate in launch is pretty darn good. So let's give the guys, let's give that team the benefit of the doubt that there will be a Starship. Their cadence has dropped from, you know, once every 5 months to once every, I think they're down to 19 days or 17 days for refurbishing. Five? Okay. Their cadence is increasing. Their reusability is increasing. They've used them, I think, 14 times now, right? So let's assume that if the Falcon 9 is the base case, this seems true. This seems possible, in which case nobody's building for it. Nobody's financing for it. There are no government programs taking advantage of it. There are no commercial projects. I got into space originally before the elevator because I wanted to build space-based solar power. That was my first thing. And the plan, you know, the plans at that time, 22 years ago, you could not build space-based solar power because it's all silicon. Silicon's like glass. Glass is heavy. You didn't have the rocket capabilities of space-based solar power. I think that if this capability comes online, going to Mars is going to be a footnote in, if you look at all the things that happen because of Starship, going to Mars is only a small component of that, because we're going to do point-to-point suborbital. I'm a former US Marine. I can imagine what 1,000 drop-shipped Marines would do in Kherson this weekend, right? Like there's things you can do with that capability. There's things you can do on a humanitarian aid capability. There's things we can do that is not really being thought about or talked about. And I would love to hear what y'all think happens when we can launch a herd of elephant to space if we want to. If we want to build a space station in a weekend, what do we do with that? And I know we're out of time, so I'm just gonna kind of cut it there. Yep. Speak up loud for the questions. Thank you. Go ahead. I'm just going to do this. This is going to be easy.
Oh, wait,
Okay, great.
got another one.
Great.
I got the same mic as you do.
All the power.
Yes, the upcoming Starship launch will be, of course, highly important. Is that just going to be straight to orbit?
Honestly, I don't care about this next launch or the one after that or the one after that, because his history is he will blow them up. I want to stop talking about scientists. I want to stop talking about him as if he's the only one in the game. There's 12,000 people there, and we need to stop talking about Elon Musk, and we need to start talking about SpaceX. All right, thank you. All right. So I don't care if he crashes this thing at all. I don't care if it gets 4 feet off the pad. I don't care, because his history, see how easy it is? The history of that company is fail, fail, succeed. So doesn't matter. Somebody over here, yes, please.
Right, you're asking sort of what happens next. I first point out those numbers, as crazy as they are, as one Starship is going to factory, 500 a year, like going. I think one of the biggest things that there's reference design for Starship is how do we go from nobody on Mars to 1 million people,
Right.
which is the minimum for a fully industrialized society, all products of today. And that's not, it's great if SpaceX does that, but like, what about all the other industries needed to build out all those surface things and all those other things?
So exactly right. But let's also consider that China just announced that they're building a 150 metric ton reusable launch system. There's at least 7 countries that are working on reusable rocketry, and there's at least 20 companies working on it. So that we're just looking at one thin piece of the pie, but the pie is giant. Yeah.
I love your talk. I love the provocativeness and mind opening up. In real time, I'm thinking we might have the engineering capacity to launch more rockets every day than the FAA will be able to process paperwork.
True story.
I think that might be the more limiting factor. Like, it's a serious thing. If you have something capable of orbit inspecting the manifests every day, like how that seems like a difficult problem.
I live in Tacoma, Washington, which is the best but not the biggest port on the West Coast. And just to see the amount of shipping containers going through there, the personnel, the staffing, the equipment, the infrastructure, and yeah, all the federal agencies have branches there to monitor stuff. Since working on the elevator, I break things into kind of 4 buckets: hardware, business, outreach, and framework. Law, policy, right? Law, that's in the framework bucket, and governance. And if you don't solve all 4, you're not going anywhere, right? And hats off to SpaceX. They've got a great Washington, D.C. legal team. They also have a really good PR team, right? So yeah, the policy component I think is super important. It was one of the things that almost shut them down from launching at San Padre was EPA restrictions for the environment. So yeah, just manifesting and figuring out what how many drug dogs do you have to do to walk the port to get 100 tons into orbit every 6 to 8 hours? Right. Yeah, it's nuts. Do I have time for one more question, or are we out? One more. Yes, please.
Hi, Mike. Paul. I'm not sure if anybody is aware of what we call the Seasteading Institute. Yeah, on presentations for them as well. They also want to be out in the middle of nowhere. Now the atmosphere is a little thicker, a little bit easier to breathe. But it occurred to me, so their idea is getting out into the gyres, the mid-ocean gyres. That's a long way. It takes a while to get a ship out there and back. And it just popped in my head. It's like, well, man, you can be there in no time. And they've already demonstrated, all of them have already demonstrated that they're fully capable of landing on a moving vessel that is still pitching and rolling. And a seastead would just be a hell of a lot larger, to the point where you could very well be entirely stable. So I wonder if you have any comments on that, or thank you.
I don't know why the screen just stopped. This has happened day 1, day 2, and now day 3 in a row. So I'm not sure what that's about. I was going to point out that his quote, Musk's specific quote, is 3 flights a day. He doesn't talk about launches. He talks about in terms of flights, which I think is an important nomenclature, that it is, we are used to flying hundreds, thousands of flights a day across the world. We've normalized all of that. I think this is a specific piece. there's some other stuff in this that actually I'm a little fuzzy on, but I think the nomenclature for flights is right. And definitely going out to remote places is going to be one of the first things. All right, I gotta wrap it up. Thank you very much, y'all. Appreciate you. Thank you.